Hey guys, welcome to Journey of Relaxation. Tonight we're going deep into the hush of a royal archive, where ink stains your sleeves, and every scroll smells faintly of lacquer bamboo. And let's be honest, mildew. You'll be waking up in a narrow wood-floored room tucked into the scholar's wing of the royal palace, shivering under a hemp blanket, while roosters scream like they're auditioning for a horror film. Outside, mist clings to the eaves, and your morning starts not with coffee, but with a ladle of cold water splashed directly on your face. Good morning, Joseon style. Your job. You're a librarian. Not the modern kind with a barcode scanner and tote bag full of late fees. No, you're part of the Gyujanggak, the royal library established in 1776 under King Jongjo. Your daily grind includes cataloging, restoring, and yes, copying books entirely by hand. You live by candlelight, pine soot ink, and the quiet dread of smudging imperial script. You also answer to Confucian hierarchy, meaning your superiors are both your mentors and your micromanagers. Oh, and your robes must never wrinkle. Ever. You shuffle into your wooden slippers and slide open the door. It's still barely light, but the steward has already set out your morning ration of barley tea and 2 slices of pickled radish. Breakfast. Not yet. You have to perform your dawn cleansing ritual first, a freezing face splash, mouth rinse and incense offering to the spirit of wisdom. You're supposed to reflect deeply during this, but mostly you're just trying not to slip on the icy stone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere far from Joseon era Seoul, drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down the covered walkway toward the scriptorium, dodging a junior clerk who nearly drops a lacquered tray of ink sticks. At this hour, the palace is mostly quiet, just the caw of magpies and the occasional creak of an over-oiled gate. Still, you feel watched. Maybe it's the carved dragon eyes above the library entrance. Or maybe it's the fact that the head archivist, Master Guan, is already inside and has been since who knows when. Inside the scriptorium, your workspace waits a low wooden desk, a fresh sheet of hanji paper, and the distinctive sharp scent of ink ground just an hour ago. The windows are covered in rice paper, letting in a soft gray glow. You roll your sleeves back, pick up your fine-tipped brush, and begin the morning's task recopying sections of the Dongguk Junggun, a 15th century rhyming dictionary that's deeply poetic and almost aggressively boring. Your hand cramps around character 47. You mutter. The ink pools too heavily on a stroke. You mutter louder. Your brush catches a fray on the parchment, and you start again. Being a librarian here is like being a monk with wrist strain. But you take pride in the precision. You even add a little flourish on your radicals, just enough that a future scholar might wonder who you were. Historians still argue whether Joseon librarians were strictly bound to uniform calligraphy styles, or allowed minor personal flair. If you're caught putting too much personality into it, though, Master Guan may have you recopy an entire folio. Again, a bell chimes faintly from the east wing, a reminder that morning inspection is near. You check your robes for stray ink marks too late and stand to stretch. Your spine pops like a string of firecrackers. One of the other scribes, Scholar Ban, ambles past holding a tray of dried persimmons and smirks. Working too hard already, he asks. Copying Jungin again, you reply deadpan. He winces, may the brush gods take pity. They don't. As you step outside to change for inspection, yes, your outer robe must be swapped for a clean one always. You notice a peculiar sight, a goose standing at the edge of the stone courtyard, staring directly at the entrance to the archive. It's not moving. It's just watching. According to one archivist's folktale, a goose once predicted the collapse of a scroll rack by honking at it for an hour. You're not sure if that's true, but you give it a respectful nod just in case. You re-enter the main hall for morning roll call, where each librarian announces their assigned tasks for the day. Yours transcribe a royal edict from 1633, clean 2 maps of the northeastern provinces, and audit a shelf of poetry manuscripts for woodworm damage. Glamorous, not exactly. But you secretly enjoy the quiet, the routine, and the way scrolls make that soft crackle when unrolled just right. Just before the assembly breaks up, Master Guan calls your name. You tense. Scholar Yu, he says your ink strokes are slightly weighted on the left again. You must correct this before your hand forgets its center. You bow. Yes, master. Behind you, Scholar Ban whispers his hand forgot its center last winter, and it hasn't come back since. You don't laugh, but only because you're trying to rub a blob of ink off your sleeve with your thumb. And so your day begins not with grandeur, but with goose stares, cold feet, and character repetition. But hey, you're preserving the soul of the nation one stroke at a time. Just don't spill anything on the maps this time. The brush is an extension of your soul, or so your calligraphy teacher liked to say. What they didn't mention is that your soul apparently has the wrist stamina of a boiled noodle. You settle back into your station after inspection robes, now crisp and clean again, brush poised like a miniature sword. The air in the scriptorium is warmer now, but it still smells of pine oil, ancient ink, and the faint acidic tang of old paper. There's also a low hum of murmurs from the other scholars, each bent over a different piece of Korea's written legacy. Your next task is to continue copying an old royal edict, a delicate process that requires absolute focus. Any mistake, even a single errant stroke, could change the meaning. A slip of the brush might turn Grant into confiscate, and suddenly someone loses a rice farm. Again. You joke, but that actually happened once, and the fallout involved a monk, 2 tax collectors, and 1 extremely angry goose. You brace your elbow, inhale, and begin. Characters form one by one in steady rhythm, each brush stroke, a careful waltz of pressure and breath. The ink flows smoothly today. You allow yourself a fleeting moment of joy that is until you reach a long string of honorifics that's as tedious as it is overly reverent. One title alone takes up an entire line, the radiant, harmonious, ever-virtuous, and eternally auspicious sovereign of the Golden Court. You mutter, "That's 5 adjectives for one person," before scribbling it down, perfectly centered and tragically respectful. As you work, the ache in your back begins its usual campaign. You shift on your cushion, adjust your posture, rotate your shoulder, still stiff. The stone floor doesn't help, nor does the fact that you've been sitting like this since dawn. Someone once proposed padded mats for the scribes, but the idea was shot down as softening the moral fiber of learning. Historians still argue whether Joseon scholars were genuinely more disciplined or simply more callous in their lower vertebrae. A quiet cough comes from your left. It's the junior apprentice Yi Min, who's probably still being punished for his failed ink experiment last week. Let's just say pine soot and soy sauce don't mix. He tiptoes over with a tray of fresh ink sticks and places one beside you with excessive ceremony. You raise an eyebrow. "What's this?" you whisper. "A peace offering," he says. "I also brought ginger candy." Now that's the kind of innovation the royal court needs. You reward him with a subtle nod and tuck the candy under your sleeve. Small moments of kindness are rare in this world of rigid etiquette and constant scrutiny. You remember being in his shoes, trying not to spill ink, trying even harder not to fall asleep mid-scroll. It's a rite of passage, one in which tea stains are more common than compliments. Halfway through your edict, a gust of wind rattles the window screens. One of the ink trays shifts and almost tips over. You lunge just in time to save it, sending a sharp jolt through your lower back. Another victory for Team Scoliosis. Your concentration shattered you. Take a short break, walking a slow lap around the archive's inner courtyard. The plum trees are in bloom now, pale pink against the weathered tiles, and a swallow dives overhead before disappearing behind the roofline. You pause to stretch, hearing your knees protest like creaky doors. Scholar Ban joins you, spine giving up again. "It's plotting a coup," you reply. You both nod, solemnly united by shared lumbar trauma. Back inside, the second part of your morning involves inspecting a set of poetry manuscripts for degradation. These are stored in silk-wrapped bundles on the 3rd shelf, just high enough to require a wooden stool. You don't like the stool. It wobbles. But it's either that or hoist yourself up like a monkey and risk tearing your sleeve again. You climb, you wobble, you reach, you survive. The scrolls are remarkably well preserved, thanks to meticulous humidity control and regular airing. Still, you spot a tiny hole bored into one corner of a manuscript. Woodworm. Again. You sigh. Another scroll will need to be frozen in a storage chest lined with pepper leaves and lavender sachets, a technique that works about 75% of the time, according to your best guess, and 0 actual science. You mark the damaged scroll with a red ribbon and note its title, Whispers Under Autumn Moonlight. Not a bad name. You might read it later if you finish early, which you won't. At this point, you've been seated, hunched, and squinting for nearly 4 hours. Your right shoulder twitches involuntarily. Your pinky finger is covered in dry ink. Your legs feel like they've merged with the mat. You are the mat now. Your thoughts drift briefly to the outside world. Maybe there's a festival in town, or someone selling fried chestnuts, or a musician performing under the bridge near the market. But here in the dusty sanctuary of knowledge, time moves differently. Slowly. Ink drops slowly. Still there's beauty in the stillness. The way the scrolls curl gently at the edges. The way the light softens as it filters through the rice paper windows. The quiet swish of brushes, the subdued coughs, the faintest creak of someone adjusting their cushion. It's its own kind of music. And so back to the brush. Back to the silence. Back to the edict that refuses to end. The final line reads, "With all solemn gravity and unfailing reverence, let this be recorded and maintained." You copy it, then let your brush fall into the rinse bowl with a satisfying plunk. You rub your temples, your back mutters threats. But for now, the page is done. One page out of hundreds. A tiny, perfect victory. You finally reach the courtyard kitchen just before second bell's stomach rumbling like distant war drums. The aroma of steaming rice, pickled radish, and fermented soybean stew hangs heavy in the air, utterly uninspiring yet oddly comforting. You've eaten this exact breakfast almost every day since your appointment to the library post. Variety, it seems, is a luxury reserved for generals and poets. You settle on a woven mat beneath the open eaves, legs folded neatly under you. The palace kitchen boys bring out the morning rations, one bowl of thin rice porridge, with precisely 3 pine nuts floating on top, a saucer of kimchi, and a mug of lukewarm barley tea. The texture is bland, the flavor faintly sour, and the pine nuts have the audacity to sink before you can fish them out. Still it's warm, and your hands wrap around the bowl with the reverence of a monk greeting his only friend. Across from you sits Scholar Ban, already halfway through his meal and reading a scroll propped up on a chopstick rest. You give him a look. Studying while chewing, he shrugs. The king's request for border scrolls isn't going to copy itself. You nod solemnly. Somewhere behind you a clerk sneezes into his sleeve, causing one of the apprentices to drop his porridge. The splatter reaches the hem of a passing eunuch's robe. No one says a word. The hierarchy of palace life is clear. Sneeze, spill. Blame the wind. Just as you're about to take your final bite, Master Guan's aide appears like a thundercloud in silk slippers. The senior scribes are summoned, he says. His Majesty's Council has a new list of document requisitions. Meet them at the administrative court by third bell. You blink. Third bell is in 20 minutes. So much for a slow chew and a quiet belch. You rise, brush invisible crumbs from your robes, and follow the others along the stone path. The morning mist has mostly lifted, revealing slivers of blue sky above the red lacquered beams of the outer palace. Vendors are setting up near the gate, though their wares are for officials, not scribes. Inkstones carved with dragons, brushes tipped with mink hair, and one very smug-looking man selling imported cinnamon bark at eyebrow-raising prices. The administrative court is humming with low voices when you arrive. Counselors in crisp robes walk in and out, scrolls tucked under their arms like sacred talismans. A senior minister waves vaguely toward a stack of documents on a table. The king requests copies of these for the northern magistrate by sundown. You all bow. One of the clerks whispers, "Of course he does." You pretend not to hear. You each grab a bundle and head back toward the archive. Yours is thicker than expected, at least 20 pages of handwritten legal code from the reign of King Seijo. Neatly rolled, tied with blue cord, and still scented faintly of cedar. Inside is a mixture of land registry edits, marriage decree revisions, and a new clause about transporting fish during high heat. Spoiler, you must now bury the fish in cool sand, or face a fine. Historians still argue whether these transport laws were genuinely effective, or just a way to punish people who didn't own enough buckets. Back in the archive, you clear your desk and unroll the first page. The handwriting is cramped, slanted, and clearly the work of someone with a vendetta against legibility. You mutter under your breath and reach for your brush. It's going to be a long afternoon. You copy line after line, occasionally pausing to scratch your head over a particularly ambiguous character. Is that ox or dew, boat or bean? You consider consulting the lexicon, but decide to guess and blame your apprentice later if it's wrong. As you scribble, various palace functionaries pop in and out of the archive. One arrives looking for a missing genealogy scroll. Another wants to borrow a book on herbal remedies for heat rash. A third comes to report that one of the palace cats has climbed onto the eaves of the archive and refuses to come down. Let it stay there, you suggest. Maybe it's studying. The functionary does not laugh. Neither do the mice. You break for tea just after the sun hits the outer garden wall, signaling mid-morning. The tea today is slightly burnt barley, oversteeped by a new apprentice, no doubt. But it's hot, and it keeps your hands warm as you watch palace life unfold around you. A court musician plays a brief scale in the distance. A gaggle of young noble boys practicing calligraphy march past under the watchful eye of their tutor. One has ink all over his face. You feel seen. Your mind drifts. You imagine a different life, maybe as a wandering scholar, maybe as a potter's apprentice, maybe as one of those smug cinnamon traders. But then again, would any of them get the daily joy of a perfectly balanced scroll line? Probably not. You sigh, stretch your fingers, and return to your desk. The king's scrolls won't transcribe themselves. Well, not until someone invents a better apprentice. Or a magic brush. By mid-morning, the sun filters through the paper-paneled windows in long gold slashes, warming your hands as you slide open the doors to the inner sanctum of Gyeonggak, the royal book hall itself. This is the moment you both dread and secretly treasure. The grand book room is not just a building. It is a living beast of paper silk dust and quiet menace. You are its keeper, and some days it feels like it might swallow you whole. The door creaks open with ceremonial slowness. You bow as you enter, partly from protocol, partly in case the spirit of a former librarian is still lingering, judging your sleeve folds. Inside, the air is dry and cool, preserved by clever stone ventilation shafts and a steady stream of sandalwood incense. Sunlight glints off the lacquered cases and gold-embossed title plaques, but mostly the room is a study in restraint. Rows upon rows of neatly labeled volumes, scrolls stacked like sleeping snakes, and cabinets filled with centuries of royal decrees, Buddhist sutras, medical treatises, and at least 6 very dusty atlases of places no one in the court has ever actually seen. Your task today is deceptively simple. Retrieve 3 Ming Dynasty medical manuals for a royal physician's review and verify their condition. But of course, nothing in Gyeonggak is ever that simple. You slide open a tall cabinet and carefully lift out a scroll bundle tied with red cord. Each scroll is wrapped in silk, each label brushed with exquisite precision. You place them on the inspection mat one by one and remove your gloves with practiced delicacy. They must be examined with bare fingers, of course, silk gloves, snag on fine parchment. And historians still argue whether that one fire in 1701 was caused by static electricity from an overeager scribe's sleeves. You doubt it, but still better safe than scorched. The first scroll unrolls with a soft crackle. The illustrations are still vibrant, stylized livers, spleens, and gallbladders, all rendered in bold cinnabar and lapis lines. You smile faintly at a marginal note: cure for dry mouth, boiled pear fennel root, and 10 minutes of calm breath. Not the worst advice you've read, especially compared to the entry 2 pages later. For sleeplessness, wrap feet in damp cloth soaked in deer sweat. You hope no one requests that one by name. You continue inspecting the scrolls, gently brushing away specks of lint with a foxhair tool, and noting 2 minor tears, one ink smear from centuries ago, and one suspiciously paw-shaped stain on the outer edge of the last scroll. You sigh. The cat again. Outside the book room, you hear footsteps, the heavy rhythmic ones of someone important. The door opens, and in walks a palace inspector dressed in indigo robes and smelling faintly of mint oil and roasted chestnuts. He nods curtly. "I am here to examine your shelving records." "Ah, the dreaded audit." You bow. "Of course, esteemed sir. May I offer tea?" "No," he replies flatly. "Let's begin with Section 9, Tang Dynasty texts." You suppress a groan. Section 9 is your least favorite: high shelves, tight spacing, and several hundred scrolls with labels written by someone who clearly had a vendetta against legibility. But rules are rules, and you guide him toward the back wall, offering commentary in your softest, "I'm very obedient" voice. These volumes were rewrapped last year in cedar-treated silk. Labels were refreshed using certified cinnabar ink. Shelf humidity is checked twice per week by my assistant. The inspector raises an eyebrow. "The one who confused beetroot dye with blood ink last month?" You smile tightly. He's learning. As you reach the back of Section 9, you find unsurprisingly that the cat is also there, napping directly on a Ming-era scroll titled Illustrated Principles of Celestial Spleen Function. You freeze. The inspector peers over your shoulder. "Is that a feline?" "Part of our pest control initiative," you reply deadpan. The inspector squints. "Does it read?" "Only when bored." To your immense relief, the man lets it pass with a grunt and resumes his inspection. You gently lift the cat, who protests with a drawn-out meow and a dramatic stretch, and tuck the scroll back in its rightful place. Once the inspector leaves, you collapse onto a cushion near the central scroll table and stare up at the ceiling beams. They're carved with clouds and dragons, symbols of wisdom and divine power. though at this point you mostly associate them with neck strain and dust. Still, there is a rhythm to the work that calms you even with the ever-present threat of claw marks and scroll audits. Your fingertips are smudged with the faint scent of cedar and ink, and your sleeves now carry the weight of 10 different centuries. Each manuscript you handle, each faint crease or margin note connects you quietly but firmly to those who came before. Your role is invisible to most, but not unimportant. You are the quiet steward of an empire's knowledge. And just as you think you might steal 5 minutes for a secret nap, an apprentice rushes in breathless, clutching a scroll. A courier just arrived. Urgent request from the royal court. You sit up. Let me guess. Before sunset? The apprentice nods with tragic solemnity. Of course it is. The scroll lands in your hands with a dramatic flair that belies its actual content, a royal memorandum requesting the complete and cross-referenced inventory of every Chinese-language agricultural treatise acquired since the Imjin War. You blink. That's dozens of scrolls. Maybe hundreds. Many are unlabeled. Some were reclassified under miscellaneous tools and drought anecdotes. One was last seen being used as a draft blocker under a palace window. Before sunset, the apprentice reminds you as if you weren't already aging in real time just thinking about it. You stifle a sigh and roll the scroll shut. Time to rally. You rise, bow stiffly to the fox statue guarding the archive you and Scholar Ban have named it Mr. Suit, and head for the records table where the handwritten catalog volumes are stored. These ledgers, woodblock printed, heavily annotated, and thicker than your forearm, contain entries on every text in Yuzhangak. Well, supposedly. Some have been temporarily loaned out for years. Others have migrated. You flip through the registry pages with increasing speed and increasing frustration. Someone, possibly the junior apprentice with the soy sauce ink experiment, has been updating the ledger using their own system. There are entries like scroll, about millet yellow cover smelled weird, and tools. Not fish-related, not sure. Your eye twitches. Scholar Ban wanders over munching a dried pear. Another sunset deadline, he asks. You just gesture toward the scroll like it's a venomous snake. Ah, he says, nodding with all the sympathy of someone who isn't going to help. You gather a list of possible candidates from the registry and head to the shelving area, affectionately known as the dead zone. It's where the less prestigious texts go to nap indefinitely. The air back here is musty and still. A spider watches you from the ceiling beam. You bow, just in case. Scrolls are stacked in erratic bundles, some with faded tags, others wrapped in fabric that might once have been ceremonial, but now looks like dish rags. You begin the hunt. Pull, unwrap, scan, reject, repeat. Scroll after scroll yields rice tax reports, beekeeping records, and one unexpected treatise on proper philosophical attitude while planting lotus. That one goes on your personal reading list. You do eventually find 3 of the key agricultural texts requested, one beautifully illustrated and barely touched, the other 2 covered in suspicious gray fuzz. You bring them to the restoration bench and start the basic triage, brushing off dust, testing ink durability, and measuring moisture levels. It's slow work, but oddly satisfying, like talking down a nervous pigeon. You mix a touch of natural glue using rice paste and water and apply it with a fine squirrel hairbrush to one torn margin. The scroll curls gently under your fingers, obedient, almost grateful. Halfway through this delicate operation, there's a crash from the far corner. You freeze glue mid-drip. The crash is followed by a soft meow. You lower your brush, walk calmly, too calmly toward the sound, and discover what can only be described as a furry paper crime scene. The palace cat chill song, you've now decided, is perched atop a fallen storage basket. Inside the basket, several perfectly preserved, now thoroughly rumpled maps of early Joseon irrigation networks. You lock eyes with the cat. I will donate you to the royal kitchen, you whisper. The cat yawns. You spend the next half hour carefully unrolling, pressing and flattening the maps with gentle weights and slightly less gentle muttering. No permanent damage, luckily. You consider documenting the incident, but decide to classify it as natural wear. Just as you're finishing, Master Guan glides into the room. He always moves like he's in a painting, calm, deliberate, vaguely judgmental. I hear you've taken up farming, he says, eyeing the scrolls. Only the theory, you reply, too early to harvest. He nods, which for him is the emotional equivalent of applause. Then he spots the maps laid out on the counter and raises a single eyebrow. Again, it was a feline dispute over property lines. He gives you a look that somehow combines centuries of Confucian disappointment into one brow movement, then departs without another word. You roll the final scroll, carefully pack all the texts together, and seal them with the blue ribbon indicating verified, prepared for royal perusal. A page boy takes the bundle with reverence, and you watch it disappear out the door. One more tiny piece of national memory preserved, transported, and probably misunderstood. You take a deep breath. The room is quiet again. Even the cat is napping, this time mercifully on an empty mat. You allow yourself a single self-congratulatory rice cracker from your emergency snack stash. It's slightly stale. You don't care. Historians still argue whether Gujanggok librarians were allowed to eat at their stations. You decide they were, as long as the crumbs stay off the documents. That's your policy now. Let someone write that into a future scroll. Of course, the sense of brief accomplishment lasts all of 12 seconds. Just as you finish brushing crumbs from your lap, another courier bursts through the archive doors. No bow, no formal greeting, just panting urgency, and a scroll clutched in both hands like it's about to explode. You don't even flinch anymore. He thrusts it out toward you. Urgent from the Royal Secretariat. The king wants a complete inventory of all Ming-era philosophical works, including Marginalia. You blink. Philosophical works. He nods, wheezing. With Marginalia. Another nod. Before sunset. He grimaces. Before late afternoon tea. You pinch the bridge of your nose and accept the scroll like it weighs 100 pounds. Scholar Ban appears beside you, sipping barley tea like a man untroubled by Ming philosophers or Marginalia. His Majesty must be writing an essay, he muses, or plotting a ban on metaphysics. It's always one of the two. You groan. Do we even have that many annotated Ming scrolls? Ban shrugs. We will once you find them. The Ming collection is housed in the East Annex, a room that smells permanently of ink, pine resin, and indecision. You trudge over scroll in hand and begin your search. Philosophical texts from the Ming era, especially ones with scribbled notes, are notoriously hard to classify. Some were originally shelved under ethics, then moved to political theory, then quietly abandoned under miscellaneous writings, see also long-winded. The scrolls themselves are moody little creatures, many covered in brittle wrapping, some double-wrapped in protective silk, and one curiously labeled private, do not recopy, in the margins. You select a promising stack and begin the laborious task of unrolling each one, scanning for signs of annotation. Marginalia in Joseon times ranged from dry comments like, "This is inconsistent with Ju Shi," to more colorful thoughts such as "written while drunk," or "reader should nap before continuing." You even find a sketch of what appears to be a Confucian scholar arm wrestling a Taoist. That one goes in the maybe don't show the king pile. By the third scroll, you're hunched over your desk nose, practically touching the parchment, trying to determine whether a smudge is intentional ink or just someone's 300-year-old sneeze. The clock is ticking. You keep moving. At one point, you pause to flex your hand and realize it's cramped into a claw. You try to stretch it only for your pinky to make an alarming popping sound. Great. You now have Philosopher's Claw. A well-known librarian condition, well, not well-known, but definitely common among those who spend 6 hours a day reading scrolls no one else has touched since the Imjin War. You take a break to breathe and down a small cup of plum tea. The sweetness jolts your senses for a moment, and you glance out the window to the courtyard where the shadows are growing longer. Sunset is sneaking up on you like a scroll audit. You return to work with renewed urgency, fingers flying carefully, labeling each scroll with a red ribbon philosophy, a gold tag Ming era, and a small black dot Marginalia found. The system is admittedly invented on the spot, but it's elegant. Scholar Ban wanders over and surveys your coded stack. Very orderly, he says, almost like you're trying to impress the king's secretaries. "I'm trying to survive," you reply. Subtle difference. One scroll catches your eye, an obscure title called Reflections on the Gentle Heart. The script is delicate, the brushwork almost feminine, and in the margin a comment reads, "Who decided scholars must always write while frowning?" You pause. A smile breaks across your ink-stained face. You like this unknown philosopher already. You set the scroll aside and finish the last few with practiced haste. When your stack is ready, you bundle them in cloth and send another page running off toward the secretariat. Your fingers are sore. Your back is more curved than spine, but the job is done. For now. You sink onto your cushion and lean back against a scroll chest with a dramatic sigh. Chilshong the cat immediately climbs into your lap, stepping in plum tea on the way. You don't even react. This is your life now. Ink cats and royal deadlines. Historians still argue whether the Ming-era marginalia were encouraged by Joseon scholars or tolerated with disdain. You think the answer lies somewhere in the tone of those scribbled side comments, the little flashes of rebellion, humor, and exhaustion. Not so different from yourself, really. The sky outside is pinking toward dusk, and a breeze slips through the shutters carrying the faint scent of magnolia and roasted chestnut. For a brief moment, the archive is silent. No scrolls to copy, no visitors, no inspectors. You dare to close your eyes. 5 seconds later, someone sneezes 3 rooms over and a cabinet slams shut. Back to work. Lunch arrives not with fanfare but with the quiet shuffle of sandals and the unmistakable clink of brass bowls on a wooden tray. You push aside a half-rolled scroll ink brush still dangling from your fingers and eye the food with cautious optimism. Today's offering doenjangjjigae, a rich soybean paste stew served with sticky rice-dried anchovies and a lone radish slice arranged with what you assume is artistic intent. It smells earthy, fermented, and slightly apologetic. You eat slowly, savoring the heat and salt. The stew's umami coats your tired tongue, and the anchovies crunch just enough to remind you you're alive. Around you, other scribes munch in shared silence. No court gossip, no philosophical arguments, just the collective chew of overworked historians wondering if the king dreams up these scroll requests in his sleep. Halfway through, your rice scholar band flops down beside you, chopsticks in hand robes slightly rumpled. You hear about the Minister of Rights, he mumbles between bites. Asked for an entire index of bamboo paper variants. Wants to determine which one absorbs ink in a way that best reflects Confucian clarity. You blink. That's the most bureaucratically poetic nonsense I've heard all week. Ban shrugs. He claims the wrong parchment undermines moral virtue. Historians still argue whether he actually believes that or just lost a bet, you say deadpan. Ban snorts. Either way will be the ones reshelving all 50 bamboo scrolls. You both fall into a comfortable chewing rhythm after that. Lunch at Gujengak is less about nourishment and more about survival. You've learned to eat with one hand while holding a ledger with the other. And today is no different. You review a catalog of parchment supplies as you chew, noting the dwindling stock of mulberry sheets and the suspicious abundance of dried gourd fibers. You don't trust the gourd sheets. They smell like footnotes and disappointment. As you scrape the last grains of rice from your bowl, Yimin, your apprentice, slinks in robes askew, holding something behind his back. You brace yourself. Scholar Yu, he says, I tried an experiment this morning. You slowly lower your chopsticks. How much parchment did you destroy? He winces. None exactly, but I may have repurposed something. With the wide-eyed guilt of a child who's broken the water clock, he reveals a battered scroll fragment. The ink has run, the paper has warped, and there's an unmistakable scent of vinegar. You stare. Explain, you say, your voice flat as slate. I read that old ink could be revived using acidic agents. So I dipped a dull scroll in vinegar, and... You raise a hand. Stop. I've heard enough. Do you remember the incident with the paste brush and the royal census record? He nods solemnly. And the great soy sauce lexicon tragedy. Another nod. And now this. He bows. I'll clean the scroll racks for a week. 2 weeks. Done. He scuttles away, leaving you holding a vinegar-scented philosophy fragment and the distinct feeling that the entire Confucian lineage is disappointed in your mentorship. You wrap the ruined scroll in protective cloth and mark it for emergency conservation, which in this case involves gently fanning it near the herb cupboard and muttering prayers to Seong Samun. Just as you're settling back into your desk, Ban slides a sheet of paper across the floor with his toe. Paper debate, he says. Settle it. Bamboo or mulberry. You peer at both samples. Bamboo is crisp, resilient, and slightly shiny, ideal for diagrams. Mulberry is softer, more absorbent, perfect for calligraphy. You pick up a brush, make a slow stroke on each, and examine the results. Mulberry, you say. Ban grins. Knew it. Pay up, Yimin. Your apprentice groans from the scroll racks. Why am I always the one who bets wrong? Because you say you always bet on the dramatic option. It's part of your charm. You return to your pile of unfinished reference scrolls and let the chatter die down. There's comfort in the daily rhythm, food work, mischief paper debates. You know where each scroll lives, which ones are secretly reclassified, and which ones are best avoided during humid months. You know which brush pairs with which paper. You know the difference between a mistake and a reinterpretation. You even know which corners the cat prefers for her naps. And so you resume your transcription duties today, a list of medicinal herbs and their poetic nicknames. You smile as you copy Willow's Whisper for weeping salve, Turtle's Eye for gout relief, and Dragon's Breath for an anti-flatulent root. Somewhere a scholar once gave these dignified names. Somewhere someone else surely rolled their eyes. Historians still argue whether these poetic labels served an educational function or were just 15th century dad jokes. You vote the latter. The final hour of your lunch break slips by in comfortable, ink-smudged peace, and as you set down your brush, you realize your hand barely aches now. Maybe it's the stew, maybe it's the paper, or maybe you're simply getting used to the quiet madness of a life spent among scrolls and scholars. Or maybe you've just finally given up. Either way, the bell rings and it's time to deal with what everyone's been dreading all day: shelf audit. Two words that strike more fear into the hearts of librarians than fire mice or ink shortages. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of dental surgery, necessary, painful, and always scheduled at the worst possible time. You gather your ledger, a writing board, and a small pouch of red silk markers used to flag discrepancies. Scholar Ban meets your eye and offers a resigned nod. Across the archive, Yi-min groans audibly. The goal: verify that every scroll codex and bound volume in Section 16 is in its assigned location, properly labeled, and free from damaged smudges or unauthorized paw prints. Section 16 is not large, but it is maddening. It houses hybrid scrolls, texts that blend medicine, astrology, and philosophy, too interdisciplinary for a single shelf, too confusing for the cataloging system. This is the twilight zone of knowledge, and today, it's your territory. You approach the first cabinet. Its wooden doors creak like they've just been told they're about to be inspected. Inside are 24 tightly wrapped scrolls, each with a small ivory tag etched in shorthand. You pull the first unrolled just enough to verify the title, then cross-check the registry treatise on healing winds and celestial rhythms. Check. Next, records of seasonal bloodletting. Check. Then herbal taxonomy by lunar phase revised. Check, but the margin smells faintly of sesame oil, which is not in the official preservation manual. You make a note. Someone has been eating too close to the scrolls again. Possibly you. You're 3 shelves in when the first issue strikes. A scroll marked Southern Herb Practices Volume 2 is nowhere to be found. You double-check the index. You check the shelf again. You check the shelf above, below, behind. Nothing. You mutter. Scholar Ban walks past. Lost something. Volume 2. He raises an eyebrow. Of course, always Volume 2. You flag the gap with a red silk ribbon and a sigh. Yi-min hurries over. I think I saw that scroll last week. Scholar Jin borrowed it to compare calendrical notation systems. Did he return it? I think he put it in the astronomy section. You stare at him. In what world is herbology a subset of astronomy? Well, the moon affects tides. And digestion, apparently. You dispatch him to search the astronomy racks, while you continue verifying scrolls with growing skepticism. The next anomaly is worse. Treatise on stomach vapors appears to have been replaced with a rolled-up blank parchment. You suspect someone borrowed it, got lazy, and slotted in a decoy. You write "fake scroll" in large red brushstrokes across your ledger and make a mental note to yell at someone later. Politely, of course. In a footnote. Moments later, Yi-min reappears triumphantly, holding Southern Herb Practices Volume 2 with a grin that is entirely too pleased. Found it. Stuffed behind the eclipse charts. You take it and nod. Congratulations. That is the least unacceptable thing you've done all day. The scroll is slightly dusty, but otherwise unharmed. You replace it, carefully secure the cord, and continue. The rest of the audit proceeds more or less as expected. Some misfiled bundles, one mislabeled spine. Someone swapped the title slip for a joke version reading, "Scroll of Eternal Bureaucratic Suffering," and several entries with odd margin notes. One reads, "Compared to Goose Theory," another simply says, "Not again." Historians still argue whether these margin notes were the scribe's attempts to improve accuracy or cries for help encoded in literary sarcasm. By late afternoon, your eyes are dry, your knees ache, and you've corrected 7 cataloging errors, located 4 missing scrolls, and identified at least one ghost scribe from decades past who invented a non-existent treatise just to fill a space. You kind of respect that. The final scroll in Section 16 is an oversized manuscript bound with gold thread, universal methods of preservation for body and scroll. You smile. A fitting end to the audit. You open it carefully and spot a familiar doodle in the corner. A small rabbit reading a book. You drew that during your first month at the library. Someone preserved it. You close the scroll, secure the cabinet, and draw a thick line across the last column in your ledger. Audit complete. You collapse onto a nearby cushion and stretch your legs with exaggerated groaning. Ban sits beside you, handing you a slice of dried persimmon. Your reward, he says, for heroic resistance against chaos. You chew slowly, savoring the leathery sweetness. So what did we learn? Ban asks. You hold up a finger. Herbology scrolls should not be shelved with lunar charts. Another finger. Blank scrolls are not effective decoys. A third. Never trust a Volume 2. He raises his own hand, and always add a joke title just to confuse future generations. You nod, already ahead of you. I planted a new one in Section 11 on the natural philosophy of dust motes. He cackles. You're going to give some poor apprentice a research crisis. Exactly. You lean back against the wall, basking in the pale light slipping through the windows. Outside, sparrows dart between the roof tiles. Inside, the archive is quiet. Scrolls are back in place. The kingdom's knowledge is safe for one more day. Even the cat is behaving, curled into a tight loaf atop the forbidden poetry chest. Let her have it. Just as you're about to let your eyes close, the palace bell rings. Once, twice, 3 times. Time to prepare for evening tasks. Your nap dies in its cradle. The late afternoon hush settles over the archive, but you know better than to believe in peace here. Evening rituals are a different beast, altogether less about scrolls, and more about rituals protocols, and the occasional unexpected visitor who insists on discussing the finer points of calligraphy while you're elbow-deep in ink. Today, the evening begins with the arrival of the king's personal messenger, a wiry man with the kind of grim expression you'd expect from someone who just delivered bad news to a tax collector. He hands you a sealed letter embossed with the royal insignia. The wax is still warm, the seal intact. You break it open carefully and read the contents. The king requires a transcription of his latest poem, a short piece praising the plum blossoms in the royal garden. But, and this is the kicker, it must be copied in the exact style of a famous Tang Dynasty calligrapher, complete with the proper stroke order and brush pressure annotations. You blink. Poetry and calligraphy are your least favorite things. Historically, the court expected librarians to be part scribes, part artists, part sacrificial lambs for such unreasonable requests. It's also a task riddled with scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these calligraphy commissions were genuine exercises in artistry or merely elaborate royal power plays. You set to work selecting the finest mulberry paper and your softest brush. The poem itself is elegant, brief, but evocative, describing the delicate plum petals as snowflakes that dare the winter to stay. As you carefully copy the characters, you focus not just on accuracy, but on the rhythm, the rise and fall of each stroke, the subtle pause, the flourish. It's almost meditative, though. Your hand protests after the second character. Midway through, the door creaks open, and an elderly scholar steps in. Master Li, a visiting official known for his relentless critiques and even more relentless incense habits. He eyes your work, then pulls a scroll from his sleeve. Notice here, he says, pointing at a faint red annotation in the margin, the use of dot strokes must be lighter to evoke the plum's fragile nature. You nod, swallowing a sigh. Master Li is both a blessing and a curse, his knowledge vast, but his presence exhausting. You adjust your strokes accordingly, dipping the brush again and again, careful not to smudge the delicate ink. As you work, the room fills with the scent of sandalwood incense and the soft scratch of brush on paper. Outside, the courtyard's lanterns begin to glow, casting gentle shadows that dance on the walls. The cat, ever your companion, curls closer beneath your stool, purring softly. You glance up from the scroll. The king's poem is more than a mere verse. It's a symbol, a link to a dynasty long past, and a subtle assertion of his reign's legitimacy. Each brushstroke is a dialogue across centuries. Hours pass. Your hand cramps. Your eyes blur. You start to question whether you're replicating calligraphy or inventing a new form of hieroglyphics. Master Li finally nods with reluctant approval. Acceptable, he declares, though the scholar in me demands more subtlety in the ink gradation. You smile thinly. Yes, Master Li. The scroll is carefully rolled, sealed, and prepared for delivery to the palace librarian responsible for the royal archives. Another task complete. You lean back, wiping your brow. The evening grows cooler, the library quieter. The weight of centuries presses gently on your shoulders, and for a moment, you feel the calm that comes from serving something timeless. Then, as always, the cat decides it's the perfect time to chase an invisible bug across your desk, scattering ink droplets and sending a scroll tumbling to the floor. You sigh but can't help smiling. Historians still argue whether cats were welcomed in Joseon archives or tolerated as necessary evils. You're firmly in the necessary evil camp. The evening deepens, and the palace gradually descends into its twilight rhythm. The corridors grow quieter, and the courtiers retreat to their chambers, leaving only the faint echoes of distant laughter, or the soft footsteps of night guards patrolling the grounds. You, however, remain tethered to the archive's flickering lantern light, completing one last somewhat peculiar task. A courier has delivered an ornate box wrapped carefully in crimson silk and tied with a jade tassel. It contains a set of rare brushes gifted from the Ming court, a diplomatic offering wrapped in silk and tradition. They are said to be crafted from the hair of the elusive golden sable, a creature of legend known for its delicate fur and the brush's supposed magical ability to capture a scholar's deepest thoughts. You unwrap the box, gingerly eyes widening as you behold the fine brushes nestled within velvet-lined slots. Each handle is lacquered and inscribed with tiny calligraphic poems praising the art of writing. The brushes feel light and precise, promising a new chapter in your daily work. But before you can even dream of using them, Master Guan appears, robes rustling softly. His gaze is sharp, but carries a hint of approval. "Those brushes are no ordinary tools," he says quietly. "They have history and responsibility." You nod, already imagining the scrolls you'll copy with these legendary brushes. Maybe the king's next poem, or one of the ancient medical texts needing careful preservation. Master Guan pauses, then adds, "The Ming gift is a reminder of our place, not just as record keepers, but as guardians of culture and diplomacy." You understand this well. The archive is more than shelves and scrolls. It's a bridge between kingdoms and eras, a living testament to connections and respect. You set the brushes down carefully and reach for the nearest blank scroll. Tonight you will practice. The first strokes glide smoothly across the mulberry paper, each line a delicate conversation between brush and parchment. The gold-tipped handles feel like extensions of your fingers, inviting you to explore new depths of control and expression. As you work, the night deepens around you. The palace lanterns flicker outside, casting dancing shadows. The scent of sandalwood lingers, mingling with the faint aroma of ink and aged paper. Chilshung curls on the windowsill, eyes half-closed, content in the calm. You pause, brush poised mid-air, reflecting on the strange mix of pressure and privilege this life entails. Every line you draw echoes the hopes and worries of generations, every scroll a thread woven into the fabric of history. Historians still argue whether these diplomatic gifts influenced Joseon calligraphy styles or remained purely ceremonial. You suspect it was a bit of both, and the rest is in the brushwork. Setting down the brush, you roll up the practice scroll and tie it with a red ribbon. The new brushes are carefully returned to their box, waiting for tomorrow's work. Outside, the palace settles deeper into night. You feel the tired satisfaction of a day well spent, knowing the archive's heart beats quietly beneath your care. Night deepens, but your work isn't done yet. The silence in the archive is a sharp contrast to the palace's daytime bustle, and it carries its own kind of weight, a gentle pressure that makes every breath feel sacred, every movement deliberate. The soft rustle of silk robes, the faint creak of floorboards, and the occasional rustle of paper are your companions. Tonight, you face a task that feels both intimate and daunting, preserving a set of delicate personal diaries written by a beloved royal consort. These diaries, penned in graceful hanja, reveal the private thoughts, daily routines, and heartfelt reflections of a woman navigating court life's rigid hierarchy. The consort's writing is elegant but fragile, the ink faded and the paper thin. You handle each volume with reverence, aware that these are not just documents, but echoes of a person, her hopes, fears, and quiet rebellions. As you carefully unwrap the first diary, you notice a pressed flower tucked between the pages, a plum blossom wilted, but still faintly fragrant. You pause, inhaling its subtle scent, imagining the consort walking in the palace gardens, lost in thought. Preserving these diaries requires more than just careful handling. You must stabilize the paper, mend tears with mulberry pulp, and ensure the ink's stability without altering the delicate calligraphy. It's meticulous work demanding patience and steady hands. As you work, your mind drifts to the consort's world. Her whispered conversations, the rustle of silk in quiet chambers, the glimmer of lantern light on jade ornaments. You wonder about her dreams, the joys and sorrows behind her words. At one point, you discover a marginal note in a different hand, likely the consort's lady-in-waiting, offering a poetic commentary on a garden scene. It's a touching reminder that these diaries were part of a living community, shared and cherished. Historians still debate the extent to which these personal writings influenced official court literature. Some see them as private escapes. Others argue they shaped broader cultural expressions. You carefully document each repair, noting the flower's placement and the various handwriting styles. The task feels like a sacred trust, connecting you to a past both public and profoundly private. Outside, the palace is quiet, except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the soft patter of Chilseong's paws. The cat curls nearby, keeping vigil over the fragile pages. You finish the final diary, wrap the set in protective silk, and place them in a specially reserved cabinet, safe yet accessible for future generations. As you extinguish the lanterns, the archive feels both timeless and alive, a sanctuary of stories preserved by your hands, waiting patiently for morning. The night wears on and the archive settles into its deepest quiet. Only the soft rustling of silk scrolls and the occasional purring of Joseon break the silence. Your eyelids grow heavy, but the work isn't quite finished. Not until you prepare the final report for the Royal Librarian, a summary of today's accomplishments and the status of the treasured collections. You light a small oil lamp, its gentle glow casting flickering shadows on the paper as you write. Your hand moves steadily across the page, noting the repaired scrolls, catalog updates, and conservation efforts. You include a brief mention of the missing volumes, the cat's latest escapades, and the new diplomatic brushes from the Ming court. The report must be precise, yet humble, a delicate balance, reflecting the quiet dignity of your work. As you write, you reflect on the day's rhythms, the tasks both mundane and extraordinary, the endless dance between preservation and discovery. This archive is more than a repository. It's a living testament to centuries of knowledge, artistry, and devotion. You pause to stretch, feeling the familiar ache in your shoulders and hands, a reminder of the physical toll beneath the scholarly veneer. But there's satisfaction too, a profound sense of purpose in safeguarding these fragile threads of history. Outside the palace, moonlight filters softly through the lattice windows, bathing the archive in silvery calm. The scent of sandalwood lingers, mingling with the faint aroma of aged paper and ink. You glance at Joseon, now curled in a tight ball, breathing softly. Her presence is a comforting constant in this world of scrolls and shadows. Historians still debate the true role of Gujanggak librarians, whether mere custodians or active participants in shaping Joseon's intellectual legacy. You believe it's both a role carried out with quiet dedication and occasional mischief. With the report complete, you carefully seal it and place it in the designated box for the morning's courier. You extinguish the lamp, letting darkness fill the room like a soft blanket. The archive breathes with history, safe for another day. You settle onto your cushioned eyelids, finally heavy enough to close. The gentle hum of the night surrounds you, a lullaby of whispered pages and distant temple bells. Now the day's work is done. Now it's time to rest.